Welcome to White History for Sleep, and tonight we begin a deep and chilling journey into one of history's most compelling and darkest figures, Count Dracula. The name itself, Dracula, conjures images of cloaked figures, desolate Transylvanian castles, and the chilling promise of eternal night. But before he became the fanged monarch of Gothic literature, Dracula was a flesh-and-blood prince, a man whose real-life brutality eclipses almost any fiction. Our focus, tonight and in the episodes to come, will be on separating the whisper of the legend from the cold echo of history. Take a deep breath. Settle in. Let the centuries of secrets wash over you as we drift back to the turbulent heart of the 15th century, a time when the Balkans were a bloody crossroads between the ambitious Ottoman Empire and the fragmented Christian kingdoms of Europe. This is the stage upon which our historical figure, Vlad III of Wallachia, was forged. To understand Dracula, we must first understand his lineage. The name is not merely a title, it is a destiny. Vlad's father was Vlad II, who earned the moniker Dracul, meaning the dragon. This title was bestowed upon him after his induction into the Order of the Dragon, Societas Draconis, in 1431. This was an exclusive, militant, and religious order of European nobles founded to protect the interests of Christianity and fight against the Ottoman threat. Imagine a world where political loyalty was as fragile as glass and survival depended on strategic cruelty. For Vlad II, being a dragon was supposed to grant him prestige and protection. Thus, his son became Dracula, son of the dragon. This seemingly heroic title, however, would later morph into a far more ominous translation, son of the devil, a subtle yet profound shift that permanently sealed his dark reputation.
The exact date and place of young Vlad's birth remain shrouded in the kind of delightful ambiguity that feeds history's mysteries. Historians generally agree he was born around 1431, most likely in the Transylvanian city of Sighișoara, which was then a thriving center of trade and a cultural melting pot. His early years were anything but stable. Wallachia, his family's domain, was a small principality directly north of the Danube River, constantly squeezed between the military might of Hungary to the north and the expanding fury of the Ottoman Turks to the south. This geopolitical squeeze dictated the brutal education of young Vlad. He learned early that power was not inherited but seized, and that life was a negotiation conducted with steel and blood. As you begin to feel the gentle pull of sleep, remember this initial tension. Vlad was born a prince destined to defend a fragile faith, yet his fate lay intertwined with the very enemy he was sworn to fight. The foundations of the man who would become known as the Impaler were laid not in a golden cradle, but on the shifting, fearful sands of the Balkan frontier. In our next episode, we will uncover the chilling details of Vlad and his brother Radu's time spent as hostages in the court of the Sultan, a traumatic experience that hardened the son of the dragon and shaped the tyrant he would become. Rest well and let the first whispers of the past guide your dreams. Vlad's father, Vlad II, earned the fearsome title of Dracula after his induction into the Order of the Dragon in 1431, a pivotal moment that defines our story. The order, known in Latin as the Societas Draconis, was not merely a social club for high-ranking nobles. It was a militant fellowship founded in 1408 by Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was then King of Hungary and later Holy Roman Emperor.
Its primary, grim purpose was clear: to defend the Christian cross against the relentless expansion of the Ottoman Empire. Members wore a badge of the dragon, often curled into an Ouroboros shape, its tail in its mouth, symbolizing eternal struggle and sacrifice. For Vlad II, joining meant an alignment with the most powerful anti-Ottoman forces in Europe, offering a crucial, if temporary, layer of protection for the vulnerable Principality of Wallachia. However, Wallachia was a buffer state, a perpetual pawn in the grand chess game between the Catholic West and the Islamic East. This constant pressure meant Vlad II's loyalties had to be transactional and fluid, a necessary survival tactic in the brutal politics of the time. The order's symbol, the dragon, which for the West represented courage and defense, also carried a different, darker connotation in the local Romanian vernacular. The Romanian word for dragon, drac, is closely related to the word for devil. This duality, savior versus demon, is the perfect encapsulation of the legacy the young Vlad III would inherit. He was born into a family constantly walking the razor's edge between piety and pragmatism, between loyalty to the West and appeasement of the East.
Details about Vlad III's earliest education are scarce, but it is known that he received the instruction typical of a prince of his era: martial arts, history, geography, and multiple languages, including Turkish, Hungarian, and Old Slavonic. This rigorous preparation was not for a life of leisure, but for the harsh reality of leadership. Yet before he could fully grasp the reins of power, political necessity intervened. In 1442, in a disastrous attempt to maintain Wallachia's independence from both the Hungarians and the Ottomans, Vlad II made a fatal miscalculation. He was compelled by the reigning Sultan Mehmed II to offer a terrifying guarantee of his loyalty. In our next episode, the course of young Vlad's life will be irreversibly altered as he and his younger brother, Radu, are delivered to the Sultan's court, setting the stage for the traumatic reign years that forged the Kazakli Voivoda. As you drift off to sleep, let the image of the order's dragon settle in your mind, a symbol of defense, yet also a precursor to the demonic reputation that awaits its son. Rest well.
Settle deeper into the quiet as we step behind the gilded yet cold walls of the Ottoman court, where the young Prince Vlad and his younger brother Radu began their years as involuntary guests. This was not a diplomatic exchange, it was a devastating security guarantee. In 1442, their father, Vlad II Dracula, was forced to surrender his two sons to Sultan Mehmed II. These boys, still in their early teens, became the Sultan's collateral, living proof that Wallachia would comply with Ottoman demands. They were taken not as slaves, but as high-value political prisoners, raised to understand the immense power of the empire they were meant to oppose. Imagine the psychological strain on a proud, fiercely independent young man like Vlad, suddenly stripped of his title and sovereignty, forced to live under the constant scrutiny of his family's greatest enemy. His brother, Radu, known later as Radu the Handsome, adapted differently. Radu quickly learned the nuances of courtly life, reportedly charming his captors and integrating into the high society of the Ottoman capital, even becoming a favorite of the Sultan's son, Mehmed, the future conqueror of Constantinople. Vlad, however, proved defiant and hostile. His years in captivity, from roughly 1442 to 1448, were a crucial, formative crucible. He witnessed the vast resources, the rigid discipline, and the absolute unyielding authority of the Ottoman state. He was trained, like many noble hostages, in the arts of war and statecraft, but always from the perspective of his captors. He saw the swift, brutal execution of dissent and the cold, calculated maintenance of order. This experience instilled in him a profound and terrifying lesson that only absolute, fear-driven power could guarantee a ruler's survival.
The Ottoman world prized strength and loyalty above all else, concepts Vlad would later apply with savage efficiency in his own principality. While Radu thrived, historians suggest Vlad grew increasingly bitter and resentful. He watched his native land being manipulated by foreign powers, his family's destiny decided miles away in a foreign palace. This resentment was fueled by the political instability at home. Back in Wallachia, Vlad II was constantly battling his own boyars, the local nobles, and the growing influence of the Hungarian general János Hunyadi. The Sultan's strategic goal was simple: to groom one of the hostage princes to become a loyal puppet ruler of Wallachia. Initially, Radu seemed the more promising candidate. Vlad's unyielding nature, his refusal to be broken by captivity, marked him as a potential threat, yet also a source of strange respect. This period of his life concludes abruptly in 1448, when, amidst a sudden political upheaval, Vlad II and his eldest son Mircea are betrayed and brutally murdered. This assassination shattered any hope of a peaceful return for Vlad. His father and brother were gone, and the path to the throne was now paved with vengeance. The Sultan, seeing an immediate opportunity, released the fiercely anti-Ottoman Vlad to claim his rightful place. But the young prince who returned was no longer merely the son of the dragon. He was a man tempered by the fires of resentment and armed with the lessons of absolute power learned from his enemies. The reign of Vlad the Impaler was about to begin. The seeds of legendary cruelty were sown during these silent, unforgiving years. In the next episode, we will trace the chaotic, short-lived first attempt of Vlad III to seize the Wallachian throne. Rest now, as the Ottoman shadow lengthens over the story of Dracula.
Allow the shadows of the past to deepen as we follow Vlad III on his first fleeting return to the Wallachian throne in 1448. The news that reached Vlad while he was still within the Ottoman sphere was shattering. His father, Vlad II Dracula, and his elder brother Mircea had been brutally assassinated. Vlad II was caught and killed in the marshes near Baltani, and Mircea, tragically, was reportedly blinded with hot iron stakes and then buried alive by the treacherous boyars, the local aristocracy, who had long resented the Dracula family's rule. This act of unspeakable cruelty burned an indelible mark into Vlad's soul. The betrayal solidified his lifelong contempt and mistrust for the Wallachian nobility, a class he would later target with unimaginable ruthlessness. Sensing a void and needing a pliable prince in Wallachia to serve as a buffer against Hungarian aggression, Sultan Mehmed II gave Vlad his chance. Supported by a small Ottoman cavalry force and a contingent of janissaries, the 20-year-old Vlad rode into Wallachia in the autumn of 1448 to claim his inheritance. His timing seemed momentarily auspicious. His family's chief rival and the de facto ruler of Wallachia, the formidable Hungarian general János Hunyadi, was away campaigning against the Ottoman Turks. For a mere 2 months, Vlad III was prince. This short reign was likely characterized by desperate attempts to consolidate power and, more crucially, by seeking immediate retribution for the murder of his family. He swiftly moved against the boyar factions he believed responsible, initiating a brief but terrifying period of
vengeance. Yet Vlad's position was structurally unsound. He lacked the broad support of the Wallachian people, and critically, his power base was seen as too reliant on the Ottoman authority, which was deeply unpopular among the Christian nobles. When Hunyadi returned victorious from his campaign, he wasted no time. Enraged by Vlad's Ottoman connection, Hunyadi quickly mobilized his forces and marched on Târgoviște, the Wallachian capital.
Vlad III found himself isolated, abandoned by the very nobles he sought to control, and wholly unable to face the might of the Hungarian army. He realized the brutal truth. He had claimed the throne, but he had not secured it. The memory of his father and brother's agonizing end must have urged him to fight, but pragmatism demanded flight. Vlad was forced to abandon his claim and flee Wallachia, marking the ignominious end of his first administration. His life now became one of a hunted exile. He spent the next 8 years wandering across Eastern Europe, seeking refuge and military alliances in Moldavia, and eventually returning, ironically, to the court of his former enemy, János Hunyadi, who recognized Vlad's fierce anti-Ottoman potential despite their past conflict. These 8 years in exile were not wasted. They were a period of crucial political education and networking. Vlad watched, he learned, and he waited, meticulously plotting his strategic and utterly merciless return to power. He realized that true sovereignty demanded not just fear, but absolute, unchallenged terror. In our next episode, we will explore this crucial period of exile, tracking Vlad's movements across the volatile political landscape of Eastern Europe and the shift in alliances that would finally pave his way back to the Wallachian throne for good. Rest now, as the seeds of the Impaler's true cruelty begin to germinate in the long, cold years of waiting.
Let us now pause the chronological march of Vlad's exile and immerse ourselves in the geographical and political reality of his domain, Wallachia. To truly grasp the actions of Vlad the Impaler, one must first appreciate the treacherous stage upon which his drama unfolded. Wallachia, known historically as Țara Romanesca, or the Romanian land, was a principality situated north of the Danube River and south of the rugged Carpathian Mountains. It was a region of immense strategic importance, yet perpetually vulnerable. The land itself was a mix of dense forests, wide rivers, and fertile plains, but its true defining feature was its location, a volatile, inescapable buffer zone. To the north lay the mighty Kingdom of Hungary, often represented by the semi-autonomous region of Transylvania, which was home to powerful Hungarian nobles and German Saxon merchants. Wallachia's princes were frequently vassals to the Hungarian crown, a relationship that provided protection but demanded loyalty and tribute. To the south, across the vast, winding barrier of the Danube, lay the relentless, expanding power of the Ottoman Empire. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans controlled much of the Balkans and viewed Wallachia as the crucial gateway to Central Europe. The pressure from both sides made the concept of genuine independence a dangerous, fleeting illusion. Any Wallachian prince, including Vlad, faced an agonizing choice: swear fealty to the Sultan and pay heavy tribute, or align with the Hungarian king and risk immediate, overwhelming Ottoman invasion. The local politics were equally lethal.
The Wallachian nobility, the boyars, were not a unified class. They were powerful, land-owning magnates who constantly schemed and shifted alliances to protect their own interests, often betraying their reigning prince to the Hungarians or the Ottomans if it suited their goal. The history of the Wallachian throne in the 15th century is a dizzying, bloody cycle of brief reigns, assassinations, and rapid regime changes orchestrated by these boyar factions. For Vlad III, his mission was clear. He had to stop the revolving door of the Wallachian throne and establish a rule so stable, so terrifying, that neither foreign powers nor internal enemies would dare challenge him. This geopolitical cook pressure explains the desperate, extreme nature of Vlad's later tactics.
In his mind, cruelty was not an indulgence, it was a policy, a necessary tool to carve out stability and independence in a region defined by chaos. He saw that the fleeting reigns of his predecessors, including his own father, were caused by an inability to decisively crush the boyar opposition and deter Ottoman advance. He resolved to change this dynamic through an unprecedented campaign of fear. As you relax tonight, picture this volatile land, the foggy rivers, the dark mountains, and the constant tread of soldiers from two empires. Wallachia was not a place for compromise, it was a crucible. In our next episode, we will detail the circumstances that finally allowed Vlad to break his exile and return to Wallachia in 1456, marking the beginning of his infamous and most consequential period of rule. Let the historical geography of Wallachia settle in your mind, a testament to the inescapable forces that shaped the Impaler. Sleep now, as the borders of history blur into night.
Allow the narrative to accelerate as we track Vlad III's movements through the long years of his second exile, a period defined by quiet calculation and strategic maneuvering. After his swift defeat in 1448, Vlad spent nearly 8 years seeking sanctuary and new alliances. He found temporary refuge in Moldavia under the protection of his uncle Bogdan II, where he further refined his military and political understanding. But when Bogdan II was assassinated, Vlad was forced to flee once more, eventually finding himself in Transylvania and, ironically, back under the sphere of his former nemesis, János Hunyadi. Hunyadi, the powerful Hungarian regent, was still the fiercest opponent of the Ottoman advance. Recognizing Vlad's deep-seated hatred for the Turks, a hatred forged in the Sultan's court, Hunyadi saw a potential anti-Ottoman ally. Vlad's knowledge of Ottoman tactics and the Wallachian landscape made him a valuable asset. The rivalry between them was superseded by the existential threat of the growing Ottoman Empire, especially after the fall of Constantinople in 1453 to Sultan Mehmed II. Over the next few years, Vlad served Hunyadi, participating in military campaigns and gaining invaluable command experience. He was no longer the desperate young prince of 1448. He was a hardened veteran, a student of war, who understood the immense effort required to secure a volatile frontier. The moment for his return finally arrived in the summer of 1456. The reigning Prince of Wallachia, Vladislav II, was a puppet of the Hungarian crown, but his weak rule and shifting loyalties had become a liability to Hunyadi's defense plans. More importantly, Hunyadi launched a major, desperate campaign to defend Belgrade against the forces of Sultan Mehmed II. This massive military effort created a vacuum in the region.
Vlad III seized this opportunity. Supported by mercenaries and perhaps some Transylvanian backing from Hunyadi, Vlad launched his invasion of Wallachia. It was a bloody and decisive campaign. The final confrontation likely took place in the area around Târgoviște. Vladislav II was either killed in battle or, according to some chronicles, captured and personally executed by Vlad III. Simultaneously, in a dramatic turning point for the entire region, János Hunyadi achieved a decisive victory at the siege of Belgrade, only to die of the plague shortly thereafter. The political landscape was instantly transformed. Vlad III was now the undisputed ruler of Wallachia, but he had lost his main external patron, Hunyadi. This meant he had to rely solely on his own resources and, crucially, on his ability to neutralize all internal opposition. His second reign, which began in 1456, would be his longest and most infamous. It was a reign marked not by mere military conquest, but by a cold, calculating, and spectacular display of cruelty designed to achieve absolute domestic control. In the next episode, we will detail the terrifying event that solidified his rule and avenged his family, the Târgoviște massacre, a purge that targeted the very boyars who had orchestrated his family's downfall. Sleep now, as the Impaler finds his place upon the bloodied throne.
The Târgoviște massacre, the bloody signature of the new rule. We now arrive at the moment when Vlad III truly earned the terror that would define his historical legacy. Having seized the throne in 1456, Vlad's immediate and most urgent task was not to fight the Ottomans, but to neutralize the internal enemy, the treacherous and constantly scheming boyars of Wallachia. These were the very nobles responsible for the chaos of the rotating monarchy and, most painfully, the brutal assassination of his father and brother. Vlad understood that any traditional attempt to simply suppress them would fail. They would merely wait for the next opportunity to stab him in the back. His solution was terrifyingly simple and brutally effective: total annihilation of the dissenting faction. The event, often referred to as the Târgoviște massacre or the Boyars' Easter Purge, is a cornerstone of the Dracula mythos. Though historical dates vary slightly, the most commonly cited account places the event around Easter Sunday of 1459. Vlad invited or summoned hundreds of the leading boyars and their families to a lavish celebratory feast at his princely court in Târgoviște, the capital. The mood must have been tense, yet compliant. The boyars, accustomed to their own deadly games, perhaps believed they could manipulate or negotiate with the new young prince. But Vlad had no intention of negotiating. During the feast, he reportedly turned on his guests, accusing them of treason, constant betrayals, and, crucially, of being directly responsible for the deaths of his immediate family. The shock was immediate, the response swift. The oldest and most influential boyars, those whose years of treachery were longest, were immediately seized, tortured, and then impaled near the town. This was a spectacle of absolute horror, designed to be seen by all. However, Vlad's vengeance against the younger boyars and their families was equally calculated. Instead of executing them all, he forced a large group, accounts suggest hundreds, to undertake a grueling forced march and labor campaign. His objective was symbolic retribution. He marched them approximately 100 kilometers south to the ruins of a fortress perched precariously on a sheer cliff face overlooking the Argeș River, the Poianari Citadel. These nobles, unaccustomed to manual labor, were forced to rebuild the ancient, crumbling fortress by hand. They were worked mercilessly, day and night, until their clothes were tattered and their bodies broken. Many perished from exhaustion, disease, or accidents during the arduous construction. This forced labor served a dual purpose. It eliminated a generation of political rivals through attrition and provided Vlad with a new, strategically vital mountain stronghold, a true eagle's nest, deeply loyal to him, as it was literally built upon the misery of his enemies.
The Târgoviște massacre and the subsequent building of Poianari Citadel sent an unmistakable message across Wallachia. Resistance to Vlad III was not met with imprisonment or exile, but with complete, excruciating physical destruction. He had finally stabilized his rule, but he had done so by initiating a reign of absolute terror that would soon spread beyond the boyars to all who threatened his meticulously defined order. Tonight, we confront the chilling act that earned Vlad III his enduring and ghastly nickname, Vlad the Impaler, or in Romanian, Vlad Țepeș. While cruelty was commonplace in the 15th century, Vlad elevated impalement from a method of execution to a sophisticated tool of governance and psychological warfare.
This wasn't merely killing, it was a policy designed to maximize suffering, visibility, and fear. The technique itself was meticulously cruel. Victims were often stripped naked. A thick wooden stake, sometimes greased to ensure a slower, less immediately fatal penetration, was inserted into the rectum or sometimes the vagina. The stake was rarely sharpened to a point, rather the tip was rounded to avoid piercing vital organs quickly. This crucial detail meant the victim would not immediately bleed out. The stake would then be slowly, agonizingly raised upright. The impaler's skill lay in ensuring the stake did not immediately penetrate the upper torso. Instead, the victim's own weight would cause them to slide down over the course of hours, sometimes days, until the stake finally emerged through the chest, shoulder, or neck area. Death was prolonged, excruciating, and often caused by shock or dehydration, sometimes lasting for up to 48 hours.
The psychological impact was amplified by the spectacle. Vlad executed large groups of people, hundreds, sometimes thousands at once. These forests of the impaled were deliberately erected just outside the major towns and along key trade routes leading into Wallachia. Foreign visitors, merchants, and potential invaders were greeted by this terrifying, silent testament to the prince's absolute authority before they even crossed the city gates. The message was unmistakable. Disobedience means a slow, public, and horrific death. Vlad applied this method indiscriminately to anyone he deemed a threat to order or a violator of his strict moral code. This included the treacherous boyars, foreign enemies, captured Ottoman soldiers, and, famously, dishonest merchants and corrupt officials. One popular, albeit perhaps embellished, chronicle tells of Vlad placing a golden cup in the center of the main square of Târgoviște. The cup remained untouched for months, a testament to the fact that the terror of the impaler was so pervasive that no one dared steal it, demonstrating his perverse but effective achievement of absolute security and honesty in his realm. For Vlad, the act was not merely sadism, it was strategic. He believed that the only way to establish lasting order in a chaotic, war-torn principality was through hyper-deterrence. Why execute 100 men quickly when executing 10 slowly and publicly could deter 1,000 more? The terrifying efficiency of the execution reduced crime, stabilized the economy, and, most importantly, consolidated his personal power, making him a figure of mythic terror even during his lifetime. This deliberate use of fear as an instrument of statecraft is what truly distinguishes Vlad from other cruel rulers of the era.
Let us shift our focus now to the borders of Wallachia, specifically to the prosperous German-Saxon towns of Transylvania, Brașov and Sibiu. These towns were crucial economic hubs, largely populated by German settlers who had been granted significant trading privileges by the Hungarian crown. For Vlad, these merchants represented a major threat to his newly established centralized power in Wallachia. Their independent wealth and control over key trade routes gave them influence over Wallachian commerce, and worse, they often harbored or supported claimants to the Wallachian throne who opposed Vlad III. The core conflict was economic. The Saxon merchants had long operated in Wallachia, using their financial muscle to manipulate prices and evade customs duties, actions which undermined Vlad's state revenues and sovereignty. Furthermore, Vlad suspected, and records suggest he was correct, that these merchants were actively supporting rival Wallachian pretenders, most notably a figure named Dan, who was a member of the rival Dineshti family. This was direct political interference fueled by economic self-interest. Vlad's response was characteristically brutal and comprehensive. He viewed the Saxons not just as economic competitors, but as political conspirators who were facilitating treason. His campaign against them began around 1459.
Vlad launched punitive raids across the border into Transylvania, targeting villages and trade caravans associated with Brasov and Cebu. His forces were instructed to show no mercy, seizing goods, destroying settlements, and, most chillingly, impaling thousands of the Saxon population, often along the Transylvanian-Wallachian border.
The chronicles, especially those written by the Saxons themselves, which, though biased, reveal the profound terror Vlad inflicted, describe scenes of widespread horror. They detail how entire families were executed, including women and children, to eliminate the root of the perceived threat entirely. One particularly famous, though apocryphal, tale originating from these Saxon pamphlets speaks of Vlad baking some of his enemies into loaves of bread, a gruesome metaphor for the absolute consumption of his opponents. The true aim of this carnage was deterrence and information control. The graphic details of these executions were meticulously recorded by the surviving Saxon communities and printed into widely distributed pamphlets. These pamphlets, known as the Dracula broadsheets, spread rapidly across Europe, serving two conflicting purposes. For the Saxons, they were a plea for help against a monstrous tyrant, but for Vlad, they served as a highly effective, if unofficial, propaganda campaign. They established his reputation for inhuman terror far beyond the Balkans, deterring enemies and terrifying his internal populace into submission. By eliminating the boyar resistance and brutally crippling the economic and political influence of the Saxon merchants, Vlad achieved an unprecedented level of control over Wallachia. He had secured his borders not with walls, but with a horrifying psychological barrier. The political landscape was now quiet, but it was the silence of utter fear. The true test of his savage governance, however, was still to come, as his attention turned from internal enemies to the immense external power of the Ottoman Empire.
Let the eerie silence of the Wallachian countryside settle in, a silence broken only by the wind whistling through the forests of the impaled. Tonight, we explore the most grotesque, yet perhaps most revealing anecdotes surrounding Vlad the Impaler, the tales of his infamous bloody meals. These accounts, often found within the German and Russian pamphlets that proliferated during and after his reign, paint a picture of a ruler who wielded psychological terror with the precision of a surgeon. The most notorious of these stories describes Vlad hosting a banquet. The setting was his court, likely Târgoviște, but the dining hall was arranged to afford a clear, unobstructed view of his latest execution spectacle. Hundreds of victims slowly dying upon stakes just outside the windows. Vlad, reportedly, would dine with relish, seemingly oblivious to the agonizing screams and the stench of blood wafting through the air. In one version of this tale, a visiting foreign dignitary, or sometimes one of the few surviving boyars, was seated at the table. Overwhelmed by the horrific scene, the noble guest could not bear to look upon the decaying bodies and reportedly held his nose or made some slight gesture of disgust. Vlad, noticing this reaction, did not immediately punish him. Instead, he coolly asked the guest the reason for his discomfort. When the guest explained that the sight and smell were unbearable, Vlad is said to have immediately ordered that he be impaled, right in the midst of the ongoing execution ground, but placing his stake slightly higher than the others, simply because the man had been disturbed by the executioner's work.
Another popular variation involves two visiting monks. They praised Vlad as a just and mighty ruler sent by God, even when confronted by the horrific sight of impalement. Vlad reportedly asked them if they truly believed God approved of his acts. When one monk, perhaps hoping for reward, vehemently confirmed Vlad's righteousness, Vlad dismissed him with gifts. But when the other monk hesitated and admitted that while the prince was just, the means were far too cruel, Vlad ordered this honest second monk to be impaled.
The lesson, for Vlad, was that absolute loyalty, or at least the public performance of it, was paramount, and any moral dissent, even when quietly expressed, was unacceptable. The historical truth of these macabre anecdotes is difficult to verify. They were likely exaggerated for propaganda purposes. However, their pervasive existence and enduring power illustrate the profound psychological effect Vlad intended. These stories were not meant to be forgotten. They were meant to be whispered in every inn and village across Wallachia and beyond. The bloody meal became a vivid symbol of Vlad's governance, a ruler so utterly detached from human norms of mercy and squeamishness that he could dine amidst death. This display of casual, magnificent cruelty served to eliminate any lingering hope of challenging his authority. The fear was internalized. People knew that Vlad's vigilance was absolute, and his response to even the slightest perceived disrespect or crime was disproportionately, spectacularly fatal. He had perfected a system of total submission. Now, with his domain crushed into terrified submission, Vlad was ready to turn his gaze outward, directly challenging the ultimate authority of his time. The stage is now set for the great confrontation between the Impaler and the Conqueror. With Wallachia ruthlessly secured, Vlad III finally turned his attention to the enemy he had been sworn to fight since his childhood in the Ottoman court, the Sultan. By the early 1460s, the ruler of the Ottoman Empire was Sultan Mehmed II, the brilliant and ambitious young man who had conquered Constantinople in 1453. The relationship between Vlad and the Sultan was initially one of uneasy vassalage. Vlad had paid the yearly harach, or tribute, to the Ottoman court, a humiliating tax that acknowledged his subordinate status. However, Vlad's years of ruthless consolidation and his blatant aggression against the Transylvanian Saxons had strengthened his position to a point where he was ready to risk defiance. His ultimate goal was true independence for Wallachia, a goal he knew could only be achieved by severing the costly and humiliating Ottoman ties. The tipping point occurred around 1461. Mehmed II, weary of Wallachia's shifting loyalties and perhaps informed of Vlad's escalating anti-Ottoman rhetoric and actions, demanded not only the overdue tribute, but also a significant symbolic gesture: 10,000 young boys for the Janissary Corps, and, most personally insulting, Vlad's appearance at Constantinople to pay homage in person. Vlad, recognizing this as a trap, a likely permanent detention similar to his teenage years, refused. Instead, he orchestrated an act of spectacular defiance. When the Sultan's envoys, led by the high-ranking noble Hamza Pasha, arrived at Tirgovishte to enforce the demand, Vlad showed them the ultimate scorn. The envoys reportedly refused to remove their turbans indoors, citing religious custom. Vlad saw this not as tradition, but as an affront to his princely authority. He ordered that their turbans be permanently affixed to their heads by driving iron nails through the cloth and into their skulls. This horrific act marked an unambiguous declaration of war.
Following this, Vlad launched a massive, coordinated winter campaign in 1461-1462 across the Danube River into Ottoman territory, targeting the Bulgarian lands. He massacred tens of thousands of Turkish and Bulgarian civilians and captured Ottoman garrisons. Vlad wrote a chilling letter to his Hungarian ally, Matthias Corvinus, proudly detailing his atrocities, claiming to have killed over 20,000 people, specifically stating that he made no distinction between the Ottoman soldiers and the local Muslim populations. This was not merely war. It was a brutal ethnic and religious cleansing designed to create a desolate buffer zone between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire.
Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, could not tolerate this open defiance and mass slaughter. He quickly mobilized the full might of his army, reportedly one of the largest forces ever assembled for a single campaign, possibly over 100,000 men. The objective was simple: depose Vlad and annex Wallachia once and for all. Vlad, with his small Wallachian army of perhaps 30,000 men, faced an overwhelming existential threat. His survival would depend not on conventional warfare, but on a genius for unconventional, terrifying tactics. The stage is set for the inevitable collision between the relentless Ottoman war machine and the desperate ingenuity of Vlad the Impaler. In the spring of 1462, Sultan Mehmed II, leading an army of unprecedented size, crossed the Danube River. Vlad knew he could not defeat this behemoth in a pitched battle. His strategy was one of scorched earth and guerrilla warfare, a meticulous application of terror designed to psychologically break the morale of the vast, supply-dependent Ottoman army.
Vlad's victory over the Ottoman army in 1462, secured through terror and guerrilla tactics, was fleeting. Although Mehmed II retreated, he left behind a fully backed, loyal successor, Vlad's younger brother, Radu the Handsome. Radu's rule was acceptable to the surviving Wallachian boyars, who had been alienated by Vlad's brutality, and he was the preferred puppet of the Sultan. Seeing his support dissolve, Vlad realized his position was untenable and made a desperate flight north into Transylvania, seeking aid from his nominal ally, King Matyas Corvinus of Hungary, the son of the late János Hunyadi. Vlad arrived seeking a massive subsidy and military support to reclaim his throne from the Ottoman-backed Radu. Initially, King Matyas pretended to offer assistance. However, the king had his own political agenda. Matyas Corvinus had just received a large sum of money from the Pope to fund an anti-Ottoman crusade, and he was reluctant to spend it on a risky, internal Wallachian conflict involving a ruler as notoriously unpredictable as Vlad. Moreover, the terrifying tales of Vlad's atrocities, meticulously spread by the surviving Saxon merchants he had tormented, had reached the Hungarian court. These Saxon pamphlets, with their lurid descriptions of mass impalement and psychological torture, convinced many European leaders that Vlad was a dangerous liability. Instead of receiving aid, Vlad was arrested on Matyas Corvinus's orders. The official charge was treason. Matyas produced forged letters, allegedly written by Vlad, in which the Wallachian prince offered to switch allegiance and ally with the Ottomans against Hungary. The authenticity of these letters is highly contested and widely discredited by modern historians, but they served the king's political need to justify the arrest of an ally and retain the papal subsidy.
Vlad III, the fierce impaler who had faced down the conqueror, was imprisoned. His captivity lasted for over a decade, from 1462 until approximately 1475. This long, silent period is one of the most mysterious of his life. Initially, he was held in a castle in Visegrad and later in Buda, the Hungarian capital. The conditions of his imprisonment were not as harsh as those he inflicted. He was a political prisoner, still a prince of value. Sources suggest that during this time he was allowed to interact with the court, converted to Catholicism from Orthodoxy, a strategic move to appease his Hungarian captors, and even married a noblewoman, possibly a cousin of King Matthias. He also fathered children, suggesting a return to some semblance of normal life, albeit within gilded cages. However, the stories of his ingrained cruelty persisted. Even during his imprisonment, accounts claim he continued to practice his hobby, allegedly capturing small animals like mice and birds and impaling them for amusement, a chilling sign that the monster inside had not been tamed. This long interlude of political exile and strategic containment was necessary for his return. As the Ottoman threat to Hungary intensified in the mid-1470s, King Matthias realized that an anti-Ottoman veteran like Vlad was more valuable free than imprisoned. The stage was being quietly set for Vlad's final, brief, and tragic act.
We reach the end of the historical life of Vlad III, the final, desperate struggle to reclaim his birthright. By 1475, the political winds had shifted dramatically in Hungary's favor. Vlad's brother, Radu the Handsome, had died, and Wallachia was once again in the grasp of an Ottoman puppet. King Matthias Corvinus, facing renewed Ottoman pressure, finally recognized the strategic value of releasing Vlad and backing his return to the Wallachian throne. Vlad, now in his mid-40s, was older, perhaps wiser, and certainly no less ruthless. With Hungarian and Moldavian military support, specifically from Stephen the Great of Moldavia, a powerful ally, Vlad III launched his third and final bid for the Wallachian throne in 1476. The campaign was swift and successful. He defeated the reigning pro-Ottoman prince and triumphantly entered Târgoviște. For the third time, Vlad the Impaler was the ruler of Wallachia. However, this final reign was destined to be tragically brief, lasting only a few weeks, likely less than 2 months. Vlad's core problem remained. He was seen as a foreign imposition. Once his Hungarian and Moldavian allies withdrew their main forces, leaving him with only a small personal retinue, the pro-Ottoman boyar factions and local loyalists of the deposed prince saw their chance. They quickly mobilized their forces to remove the universally feared impaler. The exact circumstances of Vlad's death are shrouded in the kind of ambiguity and competing chronicles that often befit a figure of his stature. The most widely accepted account suggests he was ambushed and killed by a small Ottoman scouting party or a group of Ottoman-backed Wallachian assassins near Bucharest in December 1476. The specific site is often placed in the marshlands north of the city.
The confusion over his death is so profound that several conflicting stories exist. Some accounts claim he was accidentally killed by his own men, mistaken for an Ottoman soldier while bravely leading a charge. Others suggest he was betrayed and killed by boyars, who immediately delivered his head to the Ottoman Sultan in Constantinople as proof of the impaler's demise. The latter account seems most probable. A gruesome trophy was certainly sent to Mehmed II, the preserved head of Vlad III, displayed on a pole in Constantinople to assure the populace and the European envoys that the feared Dracula was truly gone. The exact location of his final resting place is another enduring mystery. The traditional site is the Snagov Monastery, an island church north of Bucharest. However, archaeological excavations in the 1930s failed to find his remains, only the bones of horses and a few unidentified human bones, leading to speculation that his body may lie elsewhere, possibly in a humble grave near his last battle, or perhaps his entire corpse was never recovered, preventing the full closure of his dark legend. With the death of Vlad III, the historical narrative of Dracula concludes. He remains a complex figure, a national hero to some Romanians for his fierce resistance to the Ottoman Empire, and a demonic, almost mythical tyrant to the rest of the world for his unparalleled cruelty. But the historical Vlad's death was only the beginning of the legend. We now transition from the cold facts of the 15th century Balkans to the vibrant, enduring shadow of the 19th century Gothic imagination. The historical Vlad III is dead, but the name Dracula was far from silent. Tonight, we begin to explore the fascinating metamorphosis of the Wallachian prince into the immortal vampire Count, a transformation that took centuries and involved the confluence of gruesome historical notoriety and ancient, chilling folklore. Vlad's reputation did not fade after his death, it bifurcated. In his native Wallachia and Moldavia, he was largely remembered as a nationalistic, albeit severe, hero, a courageous leader who stood against the overwhelming power of the Ottoman Sultan. The Romanian narratives focused on his relentless pursuit of justice, order, and national independence. They celebrated the very acts of terror, such as the purging of the treacherous boyars, as necessary, albeit harsh, measures to protect the state. His brutality was seen as a patriotic virtue. However, in the German-speaking parts of Europe, particularly the Transylvanian Saxon communities he had tormented, the image of Vlad the Impaler became purely monstrous. The widespread Saxon pamphlets or broadsheets detailing his atrocities, the forests of impaled corpses, the bloody meals, the sadistic tortures, were effectively the first horror literature distributed across Europe via the new technology of the printing press. These graphic, sensational accounts cemented Vlad's reputation in Western consciousness as a singular, unparalleled tyrant. It is in these Western sources that the name Dracula became synonymous with spectacular evil and inhumanity. The crucial ingredient missing from the historical Vlad's story, however, was the element of the supernatural. The Impaler was a man of flesh and blood, a political animal of extreme cruelty. He had to be fused with the ancient, terrifying European tradition of the vampire to achieve literary immortality. This fusion would not occur for nearly 400 years, but the groundwork was laid. The name Dracula, with its dual meaning of son of the dragon and son of the devil, already carried a dark, potent resonance. The tales of his consumption of human blood, often derived from the exaggerated chronicles of dining amidst the impaled, linked his cruelty to the consumption of life force. The sheer, inhuman quality of his terror made him a perfect ready-made vessel for a figure that defied the boundaries between the living and the dead. The stage is now set for the appearance of the ancient myth. In our next episode, we will travel back further in time to explore the true folkloric origins of the vampire myth, tracing its roots from antiquity to the height of the vampire hysteria that swept across Europe centuries after Vlad's death. Let the historical figure fade into the gloom, and let the whispers of the blood myth begin. Tonight, we step away from Vlad III to explore the deeper, darker roots of the vampire myth itself. The concept of the dead rising to feed on the living is not an invention of the Gothic era. It is a universal ancient fear that has plagued humanity across cultures and millennia. The vampire myth is essentially the ancient world's terrifying explanation for premature death, disease, and the inexplicable decay of corpses.
Traces of blood-drinking entities can be found in nearly every major civilization. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Lilitu, a female demon, was believed to prey on infants and pregnant women. The ancient Greeks had the Empusa and the Lamia, monstrous female figures who seduced men and drank their blood or ate their flesh. These early figures were often chaotic demons or vengeful spirits, not necessarily the walking undead corpses of later folklore, but they established the potent connection between the supernatural and the theft of life force. The true, definitive foundation for the modern vampire, however, lies in Slavic and Eastern European folklore. This region, which includes Wallachia, Moldavia, and Serbia, was the true epicenter of the vampire panic in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Slavs feared the vampire, or vukodlak, Serbian, a term that describes a reanimated corpse, often identified as someone who died unnaturally, was excommunicated, or was born under peculiar circumstances.
These Eastern European vampires were not the sophisticated, seductive aristocrats of literature. They were grotesque, bloated, or ruddy corpses that caused illness, drought, and death in their villages. They usually tormented their own families first. Villagers would often exhume suspected corpses, looking for tell-like signs: an unblemished appearance, fresh blood on the mouth, or a distinct lack of decomposition. The gruesome remedies for a suspected vampire involved true horror: decapitation, driving stakes through the heart or body, often of ash or hawthorn wood, or burning the body entirely.
Enlightenment. The historical stage was set for a sophisticated literary monster to emerge from the primitive fear of the rural Slavic undead. In our next episode, we will trace how these real-life hysterias and the documented cases of exhumation sparked the interest of Western writers, leading to the creation of the first modern literary vampires that directly influenced Bram Stoker. Let the ancient fears of the rising dead settle around you as you rest. Tonight, we explore the bizarre period in the 18th century when the rustic folklore of Eastern Europe became a genuine continent-wide phenomenon known as vampire hysteria. This period is crucial, as it was the moment the vampire left the realm of peasant superstition and entered the drawing rooms and academic circles of Western Europe, providing the intellectual fodder for the Gothic literary movement. The panic was sparked by official military and bureaucratic reports filtering back to Vienna and Paris from the Habsburg monarchy's newly acquired territories in the Balkans, primarily Serbia and Wallachia. These documents detailed very real government-sanctioned exhumations and post-mortem mutilations conducted on suspected vampires. Two cases became particularly famous and ignited the Western imagination: Peter Plugajowicz, 1725, and Arnold Paul, 1731, both from villages now in modern Serbia. In the Plugajowicz case, the man was said to have died, only to return and kill several villagers by throttling them, sometimes in their sleep. When his body was exhumed, official military doctors noted that the corpse showed no sign of decay, had new skin and nails, and that fresh blood was found on his mouth. His body was staked, and he reportedly let out a shriek. The reports were meticulous and seemingly credible, written by educated Western military officials. The Paul case was even sensational, involving a former soldier who claimed to have been bitten by a vampire years earlier. After his death and subsequent vampiric activity, multiple bodies were exhumed and staked, leading to a widespread panic. These detailed, clinical-sounding reports, translated into German and French, were published and debated fiercely across Europe.
Intellectuals of the Enlightenment, including the famed philosopher Voltaire and the notorious libertine Giacomo Casanova, publicly weighed in. Voltaire dismissed the accounts, calling them relics of primitive superstition, yet the mere fact that a man of his stature felt compelled to address the issue demonstrates the myth's traction. Casanova, in his memoirs, describes a satirical encounter with a supposed vampire in Poland, showing the myth had become a part of European popular discourse, mingling fear with fascination. The spread of these reports challenged the scientific rationalism of the Enlightenment, creating a philosophical tension that was ripe for exploitation by artists. How could learned men deny phenomena reported by their own government officials? This tension between the rational and the irrational became the perfect framework for Gothic literature. The 18th century vampire hysteria provided two key elements for the future Count Dracula: the scientific documentation of the monstrous act and the validation of the ancient remedies, staking, decapitation, in official reports. The myth was now certified as real enough to terrify the literate classes. In the next episode, we will finally meet the man who synthesized this folklore with Vlad's history, the Irish novelist
Bram Stoker. Rest now as the scientific reports and old superstitions mix in your dreams.
We now introduce the figure who stands at the crossroads of history and folklore, Abraham Bram Stoker. Born in Dublin, Ireland in 1847, Stoker was a theatre manager, a civil servant, and an aspiring writer whose life was far removed from the dark forests of Transylvania or the blood-soaked court of Vlad III. Yet it was Stoker who, through meticulous research and a keen sense of Gothic drama, would immortalize the vampire myth. Stoker's day job for many years was managing the Lyceum Theatre in London for his close friend, the legendary actor Sir Henry Irving. This position placed him at the heart of Victorian London's artistic and cultural elite. Stoker was surrounded by the grand theatrical sensibilities of the era, a love for the melodramatic, the sensational, and the exploration of the hidden, often darker passions lurking beneath the strict Victorian exterior. This atmosphere deeply influenced his writing. The vampire concept had already begun to find its footing in English literature long before Stoker. The first definitive English vampire story was John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, which introduced the world to Lord Ruthven, a dark, aristocratic, and seductive vampire, a complete departure from the peasant corpse of Slavic myth. This paved the way for the elegant, predatory monster Stoker would later perfect.
Stoker spent years researching what would become his masterpiece, Dracula, published in 1897. His process was not based on personal experience in Transylvania, which he never visited, but on exhaustive reading in the London libraries, particularly the British Museum. He immersed himself in books about Eastern European history, geography, and folklore. His reading list was extensive, covering everything from the 18th century vampire hysteria reports to regional travelogues like Emily Gerard's The Land Beyond the Forest, 1888, which provided vivid, if romanticized, descriptions of Transylvanian landscapes, customs, and the local belief in the strigoi, a type of vampire spirit. Gerard's work provided Stoker with crucial atmospheric and mythological details, including the use of garlic, the need for running water, and the chilling, dramatic geography of the Carpathians. Initially, Stoker planned to name his villain Count Wampire, but his historical research changed everything. A crucial moment came when Stoker consulted a book on Wallachian history. He found a footnote mentioning a 15th century prince named Vlad Tepes, who was known for his monstrous cruelty, and noted his patronymic, Dracula. The name, with its powerful, resonant link to both the dragon and the devil, immediately captivated Stoker. It had the perfect mix of historical authenticity and menacing supernatural suggestion. In our next episode, we will open Stoker's personal research notes to see exactly how he consciously fused the historical tyranny of Vlad the Impaler with the ancient superstition of the blood-drinking undead, forging the Count Dracula we know today. Rest now as the theatrical imagination of Victorian London begins to weave its dark magic.
Tonight, we delve into the heart of the legend-making process by examining Bram Stoker's own research notes, which reveal the deliberate choices he made to transform the historical tyrant Vlad III into the terrifying aristocratic vampire Count Dracula. Stoker's handwritten notes, preserved in Philadelphia, confirmed that the fusion of history and myth was intentional and deeply calculated. The most critical element Stoker borrowed was, of course, the name. Finding the name Dracula, with its powerful etymological links to the dragon order and the devil, was a breakthrough. Stoker explicitly wrote down the translation in Wallachian language means devil, and quickly adopted it, believing it provided the necessary dark pedigree for his villain.
The name alone provided a 4-century-old lineage of terror. Stoker did not simply transplant the story of Vlad onto his vampire. He borrowed selective traits and created a fictional ancient lineage for the Count. The novel often subtly references Vlad's historical campaigns and political status. Count Dracula, in the novel, boasts of his own proud race and his ancestor, a voivode, a military governor or prince who fought the Turks and crossed the Danube to wage war on the Sultan's territory. This is a direct, albeit veiled, reference to Vlad the Impaler's 1462 campaign against Mehmed II. Furthermore, Stoker borrowed the historical context of the Carpathians and the Transylvanian region, which was associated with both the historical Vlad and the deep-seated Slavic vampire folklore. The Count's castle, set high in the Borgo Pass, places him geographically and historically in the perfect, isolated nexus where ancient history and modern terror could meet. However, Stoker was careful to filter Vlad's horrific specific cruelty. He eliminated the act of impalement, which was perhaps too grisly and politically complicated for a Victorian novel. Instead, he substituted the act of blood drinking, which had its roots in the ancient vampire myth, but which he made aristocratic and seductive. The blood drinking becomes the new terrifying impaling, a psychological and moral violation rather than a physical torture. Stoker also needed to justify the Count's eternal existence. He gave the Count a backstory rooted in alchemy, dark arts, and ancient forbidden knowledge, suggesting that the voivode Dracula, in his fight against the enemies of Christianity, delved into the occult and became undead. This transforms Vlad's historical violence into a supernatural curse, an endless, unholy punishment for his earthly sins. By synthesizing the historical lineage and military pride of Vlad III with the nocturnal, blood-sucking characteristics of Slavic vampire folklore, Stoker created a villain that was both historically grounded and mythologically eternal. The result was not merely a monster, but a potent symbol of dark, ancient power invading the progressive, civilized world of Victorian England. The historical legacy of the Impaler finally found its immortal form.
As we immerse ourselves in the narrative of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, we encounter the ultimate literary fusion of historical terror and supernatural dread. The Count Dracula of the book is a masterwork of Gothic characterization, combining the predatory instincts of the folkloric vampire with the cultured, aristocratic menace of the historical prince. Physically, the Count is initially presented as a figure of unsettling contradiction. He is tall and gaunt, yet possesses immense physical strength. His most distinguishing features, the sharp protruding canines, the hairy palms, and the pointed ears, are subtle nods to the more monstrous, bestial qualities of the traditional peasant vampire. Yet he is cloaked in the elegant manners of a European nobleman. This veneer of sophistication is key to his menace. Psychologically, Count Dracula is defined by his ancient, unwavering will and his profound anachronism. He is a relic of the past, a man or creature who has lived for centuries, retaining the mindset of a feudal lord. His ambition is to leave the desolate confines of Transylvania and conquer the vibrant, populous world of modern London. This invasion of the primitive and ancient into the heart of the modern symbolizes the Victorian fear of atavism, the dread that the savage, untamed past could resurface to corrupt the present. The Count's powers are vast and terrifying. He possesses the supernatural abilities derived directly from Slavic myth, shape-shifting into a bat, a wolf, or mist, commanding elements of nature, particularly the weather, and exercising hypnotic control over his victims. But his greatest power is his ability to infect others, turning his victims into lesser versions of himself. This aspect taps into the contemporary Victorian fear of social contagion, moral decay, and the corruption of female purity, particularly through the figures of Lucy Westentra and Mina Harker. Dracula is also presented as deeply religious, though in a perverse way. He fears the crucifix and communion wafers, symbols of the Christian faith he supposedly died defending as the historical Vlad. This creates a fascinating internal contradiction, a defender of the cross who became a creature of the ultimate Antichrist. This paradox reinforces his supernatural evil. Ultimately, Count Dracula is the embodiment of forbidden, unrestrained desire. He is a predator who is sexually charged, yet sterile, eternally young, yet profoundly ancient. He represents the wild, uncontrollable aspects of human nature that Victorian society desperately sought to repress. Stoker's genius lay in channeling the real political tyranny of Vlad the Impaler, a man who ruled by dominating the life force of his subjects and translating that into the supernatural dominance of the immortal vampire, a creature who literally dominates the life-giving blood of his victims. Tonight, we explore the crucial role of geography and atmosphere in Bram Stoker's Dracula. The novel's setting is not merely a backdrop, it is an active participant in the story, establishing the perfect mood of isolation, dread, and ancient mystery. Stoker, despite never visiting the region, used meticulous research to create an unforgettable landscape. The primary setting for the Count's origins is Transylvania, literally meaning the land beyond the forest. This name itself carries a powerful resonance of the unknown and the uncivilized, perfectly aligning with the Victorian notion of Eastern Europe as a place of wild, untamed passions and dark, entrenched superstitions. Stoker's novel begins by setting an immediate, chilling scene as the young solicitor Jonathan Harker journeys into the Carpathian Mountains and approaches the castle. The descriptions are vivid and essential. The wild and rugged landscape, the howling wolves, the superstitious peasant villagers with their garlic and crucifixes, and the palpable sense of dread that intensifies with every mile traveled toward the Borgo Pass. This pass, a real location, is presented as a geographical and temporal boundary, a gateway not just between regions, but between the modern world of the West and the ancient, unchanging world of the Count. Count Dracula's castle is the ultimate expression of Gothic horror. It is enormous, ancient, crumbling and isolated, a fortress built on the bones of history. The labyrinthian passages, the damp, unused rooms, and the profound silence all contribute to a feeling of entrapment and slow suffocation. The castle is a physical manifestation of the Count's own mind, an archaic, formidable fortress built to withstand the passage of time. The contrast between this eastern landscape and the novel's second main setting, London, is deliberately stark. London represents light, modernity, science, commerce, and Victorian rationality. Dracula's goal is to corrupt this order by injecting his primal ancient evil into its very heart, using the mundane, civilized infrastructure like shipping ports and property leases to facilitate his supernatural invasion.